episode, we talk about why rent controls look good on paper but don't work in reality, why the vilifying of landlords in the media is unfair, and the unintended consequences of Labour's proposed EPCC targets by 2030. With our special guest, Deputy Leader of the City Hall Conservatives and London Assembly Member, Emma Best. Thank you so much for joining me today, Emma. It's really, really great to have you on today and to talk about rent controls. As we were just saying a little bit before we got started, rent controls sound good on paper, but don't work in reality. And also, it'd be great to hear about some of the solutions to London's housing crisis as well. But before we get on to all of that, it would be really great to hear from yourself about how you got involved in politics and how you became a member of the London Assembly.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on today, Gabriella, and really excited to get into those discussions later. I don't know whether it's a bit sad or not, but I actually joined the Conservative Party at 13, so I was like in
Oh,
politics early doors. My parents were more Labour voters, so maybe it was like a teenage rebellion, but a sad one at that. But so I got involved really early on, and it was just kind of like the injustices that I could see around me, where I lived. Things to do with crime, welfare issues where people were being trapped on the welfare state, housing issues. And from there, I started becoming involved in politics, became a councillor in my early 20s, and I just kind of loved it. I loved helping people. I mean, I think when everyone gets into politics, they think they want to change the world, right? And then you just start helping people and individuals and changing their individual world for the better. And I was like, I want to do more of that. And so the opportunity to run for the London Assembly came. And so I've been on the London Assembly now since 2021, and I love it. It's a great opportunity to not just help in the small council area I live, but help Londoners across the city.
that's right. That's really, really great to hear. And it's great that we're getting more women in politics as well. So that's really, really great. And now moving on to rent controls. So on the Property 118 website, we've done hundreds and hundreds of stories about rent controls, particularly in Scotland, as we've seen that they just have not worked at all. So obviously, rent controls were introduced during, I think, around COVID time in Scotland, and rents completely skyrocketed. And now, obviously, I think rent controls have ended there, but then now the SNP have decided that because rent controls seem to work so well last time, that they're going to be introduced in the Scottish Housing Bill. And as we've seen, we did an article with the Scottish Association of Landlords that said that 22,000 private rented homes in Scotland were lost in just 1 year because of rent controls, which is just absolutely crazy. But why do you think they're being presented as a solution to the London housing crisis when we've seen in Scotland that they just don't work?
Yeah. Well, I think, and talking about the Scottish example in Edinburgh, that was in just six months, you saw a 14% increase in rent. I mean, think about doing that over any length of time, right? The reason why it's being talked about so much is because it's easy, it's populist, and I mean, from the sound of it, what's not like to like about that? So in places like London, the mayor can say that, and he knows before he was the mayor, when he had to think about being in government and being an MP, he was against rent controls. Then he became mayor, and now it's not his problem anymore. He doesn't have the powers, so he can say, I'd like rent controls. That way he can say, it's the government that aren't giving me the power to do that, and it's out of my control. So I can see how for the mayor is a very easy excuse, right, to say that's why I'm proposing I'd like to propose rent controls, and that's going to fix everything. Again, I'm befuddled by it in Scotland how they've now done this once and seen it doesn't work, and now going to look to do it again. It's something that I speak with about people often, and I'd really like to have a more nuanced, positive conversation about, why it could possibly work. But you just can't find any evidence to support it. It really is that simple. And when I say to people, Why do you think rent controls will work in London? What model are you looking at? Give me any model in the world, over the last 100 years, give me any model. And I'll say, and the same answer will always come back. It's like, well, this is London. We won't have the same model as anywhere else. It will be different. And that's what everyone has always said. We will have a different model and our model will work. Well, every model has now been tried. I mean, you look at Berlin, when they brought rent controls in Berlin, you had 172% rise in demand. That's just not something we can even compete with or look in London. If we lose stock at that rate, if we have a demand rise of 172% in London, the fallout will be catastrophic. So I see why people say it's the answer. I think there's a section of people that say it's the answer because it sounds good. They want lower rents. They're struggling with their rents. And by the way, just to say, I would not deny that the cost of rent in London is a huge issue. We're not taking away from that. We're not saying, that the inflation of rent in London is sustainable or the prices that people are paying is sustainable. But this is simply not the answer. But I see why those people think this is the answer. And then you have slightly less well-intentioned actors in this debate who know it's not the answer, but it's a way to get the problem off their doorstep, to say rent controls.
Yeah, exactly. And as you just said, it just sort of seems like a quick solution. Just, oh, yeah, rent controls. But obviously, as you were just saying there as well in Berlin, that's absolutely crazy. I didn't realize the demand rocketed up by 172%. That's absolutely
Yeah.
crazy. And also, as you were just saying there, it seems to be a quick fix for the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. So, as we've just been saying, there's all this evidence to suggest that it doesn't work. So, why do you think the London Mayor Sadiq Khan keeps pushing for rent controls?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, like I say, it gets it off his desk, but it's strange when you go back to 2015. So the London Assembly did some research into what it would mean to bring in rent controls in London. So the University of Cambridge did this, uh, and you found that we would have a possibility of a 62% reduction in available properties. So the London Assembly has its own research that shows that this wouldn't work. So the fact that the mayor is still suggesting it after not only does the worldwide evidence show that it wouldn't work, but the London Assembly's own research shows it wouldn't work. It simply comes down to the fact that there is a real issue there, right? And I think hopefully we'll come onto that in a bit, is that there is a real issue there. There's been an exponential rise in the private rented sector in London. The cost of that is risen as well and inflated over the last 20 years. People are paying out huge amounts of their income on their rent. I think the average is about a third of a Londoner's income goes on rent, but I know there's people that are paying, up to over half of their salary on their rent. We know there's a huge problem. Tackling that, and without coming to the spoilers of later, is not as easy as saying we will just control the rent. You can't control any market. That is simply what it is. And there's too often, and the mayor does this a lot, there's this tendency to paint landlords as kind of like, some greedy man sat on a large lump of, cash, fanning themselves with cash. And that's not the reality of landlords, especially a lot of landlords in London. Landlords are just keeping afloat as well. You have a lot of reluctant landlords where people have taken on properties from either relationship breakdown or from familial death. That there's not simply this image of a landlord that's greedy sitting on a big stack of cash, and it's not that easy. But for the mayor, that's an easy picture for him to paint, and to say something like rent controls and stop, the evil greedy landlords taking all the money. That's an easy story to tell, and he's decided it's easier to tell that story than fix the problem of getting rents down for Londoners.
Exactly, exactly. As you said there is this narrative that all landlords are bad. As we know, of course there are bad landlords out there in the private rented
Absolutely.
sector. Of course there are. But the majority are really good landlords who are just trying to get by. And obviously now with all these things being thrown at them with the renters' rights bill and obviously, the talk of rent control, sorry. We'll come on to the renters' rights bill in the moment, but one thing that's also concerning a lot of landlords is the energy efficiency targets. So obviously there's Ed Miliband has proposed that all private rented sector properties will need to meet EPCC targets by 2030 and 2028 for new tenancies. Obviously, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan supports this as well because we've done articles on this where
Mm.
the London Mayor Sadiq Khan says that he wants also EPCC targets for private rented properties as well. But as we were just saying there, landlords are only just getting by because these EPCC costs are hugely expensive. And if you've got some properties, they might just not be able to get to these targets because obviously, if you've got like an old Victorian property, it's going to be really, really hard to upgrade to that C target. So, will the City Hall Conservatives be challenging London Mayor Sadiq Khan on this, particularly with the cost element? And the timeline as well, because 2030, it feels like far away, but it'll probably be here before we know it.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, we're all getting older, and 2030 is actually a lot closer than it might
Yeah.
seem. But the we have challenged on this already, and I think I'd just state to make clear that actually making our homes more efficient is absolutely where we want to be. I mean, and that should be the target. We want obviously homes for not only the safety of those living in them, but also because of the economic cost for those living and the environmental cost as well. This is a target that we support and want to be reached, but you have to look again at the world isn't perfect, right? And we have to live within the parameters of the world. And the reality is, as you said, London is full of old Victorian houses. And there's a lot of renters out there that have been renting those homes for 10, 20, even 30 years. There's, some older tenancies as well. And it's simply the mission of getting those properties to 20 by 2030 to that standard is perhaps not even possible. So the reality of what you're saying is you're going to kick long-term tenants out that are happy with their home, and surely that's not where we want to be. So I think actually, if you look at the target around new tenancies, it's okay, if we're looking at perhaps properties that are new to the market, and having a standard at which we want homes to be, that's something else. And I think we should look at incentives as well and how we can subsidize and make that happen, of course. But that's one thing that would help us get to the target. But I think the issue that I am concerned about with this target is those long-term tenancies and some of the properties in London that are safe, clearly not as energy efficient as we would like them to be, but they are safe properties to live in where there are elderly people, families. These are family homes, and we're going to say you have to leave essentially if the landlord can't make the changes by 2030. There's also even if, and we've already touched on, or you touched on the constraints at the moment. Everyone's feeling the constraints of the cost of living, and within the private rented sector, that's no different. But there's also a workforce shortage, and the mayor himself has seen this when he launched his own Solar Together project, and that collapsed because they oversold on this solar project from the mayor and ended up having thousands and thousands and thousands of complaints, and they couldn't fulfill all the orders across London that they had. That scheme was only small, and even the mayor, in terms of London, that scheme was small, and the mayor couldn't fulfill his promises on energy. So we have to look at actually the reality of, even if you have the funds, when you look at the workforce availability, actually getting this work done across London, if every landlord started tomorrow on this work to get it done by 2028 even, or that's definitely not going to happen. And 2030, I don't see how that's going to happen as well. So we have to have we want those targets, and I think that, like I say, I think there can be more of a conversation around those new tenancies, but we also have to be honest about where we are in London, and that 2030 target. What would actually be the outfall of sticking to that? And it would be homeless families and elderly people in London.
Hmm. Exactly. And I think, like you say there as well, at the moment, it kind of seems just a one size fits all solution for everything with these energy efficiency targets. Oh, let's just say that all private rented properties need to meet EPCC targets by 2030, and it's just a one size fits all solution. But as we've just been talking
Mm.
about, of course, there are London Victorian properties that are going to be really, really hard to meet these targets. And as you said, some of the unintended consequences of this could be that landlords actually sell up because of this, and long-term tenants are left with nowhere to go. So obviously we've been talking about rent controls here, the energy efficiency targets as well. So what do you think are some of the solutions to the London housing crisis that the City Hall Conservatives are that they can help with?
So I think the first thing that obviously I have to say is it's to come back to, it's a market issue, right? So we have to meet the demand with supply. It is about build, build, build. So we do need to build, and we need to build the right type of properties that people want to invest in. And I fear at times with some of the targets that we've put on housing, we have pushed people to go for units and trying to get numbers up on one small site, and these have turned into be houses that people don't actually want, or they don't want to invest in for a landlord or to buy, um, because it's just a number on a sheet, right? How many units can we get in? So we need to build more, but I also want to see us building larger places, so more 2 beds, 3 beds. When I think back to uh, renting in London, when I look at some of my younger friends now and how they rent, the majority of people will rent with friends, right? So why are we building untold numbers of studio flats and 1 bed flats? This is just causing more overcrowding in London. And it's also not an appealing thing for landlords to rent from that side, because you're probably walking into issues with it having overcrowded, it being overcrowded. So it's those building larger places so that families can buy them, but or rent them, and as well young people can also look to move into those with friends instead of uh, being in a cramped studio that they can't afford. Then the second part of that is also looking at some of the parking restrictions that have been put on. So there's this massive push towards car-free developments. And again, these aren't actually places that people want to buy, especially in the suburbs. I live in outer London, and the push for car-free development is seeing a lot of the developments that are built staying untouched for a long time, because actually if you live on the border of London, you do need a car. It's not, tubes everywhere, unfortunately, as much as I would like one by my house. So it's not just about building, but it is, we need to build, but it's what are we building, and it's building things that people want to live in, that people want to buy and or invest in. And the other thing that I make a point of that City Hall Conservatives stand up for, but I think London as a whole needs to in terms of fixing the housing crisis, is recognising that we are the only country in the G7 which has only one global city in London, and that's not sustainable. So as Londoners, as London politicians, we need to still speak up about levelling up other cities in the country. We still need to see that expansion and that housing growth there and that economic growth, because I think London does have a ceiling when it comes to housing. So, I mean, hey, new inventions, out of the mind. Maybe someone invents how to scale up cities in the sky in the future. But apart from that, we do have a ceiling. So we have to look at how we can expand other and have at least another global city in England, in the UK, because that would allow the housing crisis as well. We would have other places to build, that where there's new economic opportunities, that would mean that there was another destination within the UK, which again is going to reduce the demand in London, so we can kind of catch up with that supply. Because if we keep on going at the rate we are in London, even, if we were to massively accelerate building, we aren't going to catch up with that demand unless we find another global city in the UK. It's just never going to happen. So that's one of the biggest ways in which we need to fix the housing crisis. The other tail end of that is that the private rented sector in London and the growth of it over the last 20 years, that can't continue, because renting is extremely important and people want to rent. There's a market for renting and there's a lifestyle that suits. But the problem in London is that we have far too many people now that want to buy properties, that want to own their own property and are stuck renting. And that's not where we want to be as a city. That's not where we want to be anywhere in the country. But at the moment in London, that's where you feel that the most. And so actually there's a third tail here is helping with ownership. So we have to look at how we can make sure that we can address deposit schemes to make sure that we can get people onto mortgages where they can clearly show that they have been paying rent and could afford a mortgage. It's just getting over that hurdle of the deposit. So either with better ISA schemes through government, tax relief towards homes, or simply with negotiations on how we get mortgages with lower deposits. So those are the three things that we really need to do in London, I would suggest, to fix the housing crisis. And just to stipulate again, not one of them is rent controls.
Exactly. There's some really good solutions there. And yeah, definitely, because as you were just saying, some of those solutions there, and meanwhile, London Mayor Sadiq Khan is just saying rent controls, as we've seen,
Yeah.
as you've just highlighted there, there is some huge problems, particularly with supply and demand at the moment. And moving on to the Renters' Rights Bill now, just to say we're filming this, so we don't know. So the Renters' Rights Bill has gone through the committee stage now, and we're just waiting for a date for the report stage. But I was wondering, what is the City Hall's Conservative stance on the Renters' Rights Bill?
So we were fully supportive of the Renters Reform Bill, which came before. So a lot of that is now takes form in the Renters' Right Bill, and there's a lot of that we can support. A couple of the concerns I have on this is that the court system at the moment is not going to support what is in the Renters' Rights Bill, with the delays, with the wait list, with the shortages in our courts right now. What we're suggesting in that Renters' Rights Bill is just not going to. It's not going to be feasible to carry these processes out in a timely manner through the court system. So that's my concern, is that perhaps where there is good intention, that it's actually going to, unless we fix the kind of back office problems with the courts, then there's going to be issues. So that's one concern I have. The second concern I have is that too often, and I think again the Renters' Rights Bill is going to lead into this, is it's unscrupulous landlords are not going to play by the rules. And again, by fixating on more rules, well, I think there's many benefits to that in making kind of both parties, of both the landlord and the tenant, clear on where they want to be. For example, formalising that everywhere you need a written tenancy, that this is good. But to unscrupulous landlords that are creating issues for tenants, the Renters' Rights Bill doesn't change anything. And they will still continue the same practices. They will still continue to put tenants in the same dangerous properties. They will still continue to threaten and evict tenants at a moment's notice. So my concern is, and again, I think it's this painting of the stereotype of the landlord, and who they may be. I think that's again the concern, is that actually by not realizing that the majority of landlords do play by the book and do the right things, that actually it's the unscrupulous landlords that don't play by any of the rules, that will continue to do so. So I think the Renters' Rights Bill hopefully formalises a lot of processes that good landlords and tenants are following anyway, and hopefully clarifies lines in which, when things escalate, that the routes to go down. Again, touching on the fact that I don't think the court system will be able to handle that right now. But I would just emphasize again and again, and it's the same for the Renters Reform Bill before it, is that we unscrupulous landlords are the issue. And again, this, I do not see how this is going to stop them from the behaviours that they exhibit.
Exactly, exactly. And I think you just hit the nail on the head there because obviously you can put all these rules and regulations in, but unfortunately, there will still be some criminal landlords that just operate in the private rented sector, unfortunately. And as you just touched on there as well, particularly with the court system as well, as we know, there's a huge, huge court backlog at the moment. And it seems that the Renters' Rights Bill doesn't seem to be putting in any kind of investment into the courts because at the moment it just seems like the courts aren't ready.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to be suggesting that you're going to put this extra burden onto the courts surely needs to come with the investment into the courts to deal with it. So that is my concern with that, is actually delaying these processes with good intention, but we aren't in a place where that can work right now, unfortunately. So those are, yeah, those are my two concerns really with the Renters' Rights Bill. Though I would say, and obviously as a group we supported the Renters Reform Bill. I do see there's a lot of good things in the Renters' Rights Bill, but I think again it's we'll see how this progresses, but there are ways in which this can be amended that would make it slightly better.
Exactly. And going on to that now as well, because obviously the Renters' Rights Bill, there does seem to be some unintended consequences at the moment because as we've seen on the Property 118 website, a lot of landlords are just saying that this new piece of legislation is just the final nail in the coffin for them, and they're just going to be leaving the market. And obviously, we want good landlords to stay in the private rented sector. So, what are the City Hall's Conservatives' plan to tackle this problem?
So I think at the moment, what we can do is take a strong stance against rent controls, for standing up for landlords. So my colleague Sean Bailey has recently done a housing forum, and there's a report coming out from that shortly. So unfortunately, that report wasn't ready before we did this interview because I think there had been a lot of good stuff in there to talk about. But he's led on that engagement, and I think that's what we can do, is we can engage with landlords and we can say that we think that you play an important role in London's housing portfolio, and we need you to stay. So that is what we can do. I think we can also lobby councils that are making it slightly more difficult for landlords. And I think, as I said earlier, it's looking at how we build and making sure that we're building the right types of properties that people would want to buy or invest in. Um, but I think it's almost being that advocate, which I think a lot of people struggle with. A lot of politicians, especially, struggle with being an advocate for private landlords. And I think perhaps for me, I don't see. I don't, when I talk about think about landlords and struggle, I'm not thinking that, people with 200 property portfolios, but somebody that has inherited their bereaved, their deceased mum's property, and they've got, a sister or a brother, and they're trying to work out how to deal with this property, and they've got to rent it, or a family that has just broken up and they're trying to deal with the property they bought together whilst now trying to find two other smaller properties for themselves, which they'll have to rely on the private rented market for as well. And it's this cycle which I think is really important. And I know landlords that once they have a good tenant, they're not raising that rent for years and years and years. There's people that are still in London, and it bears out in the statistics where you see rent increases in London, they're from new listings. But actually, when you look at existing tenancies, you hear the horror stories of where things have been risen by £500, £700. But actually, the reality is that most people, if they have a good tenant and the good landlord, that over the course of 10 years, sometimes landlords won't have even raised the rent once, because they value having a good tenant and they've got a good relationship. And those are the real stories, I think, in London that sometimes are missed in the debate, is where you see, and it is really difficult for those entering the market for the first time, and properties are really expensive. But there is also this other story where landlords are, some tenants, first port of call. It's elderly people, and they're the first person they're going to call, and they'll do the shopping for them. That's these aren't these evil stereotypes of greedy landlords. So I think that one thing that's really important, and it's not a policy, is just talking about that, and being willing to talk about the positive contribution of landlords to housing, and making it clear that not all landlords are in it for massive financial gain. They're just getting by as well. So I think that's something really important we can do to landlords. Until we have the mayoralty back in London, I think we are relatively constrained, apart from making the case against some of what's happening. But I think once we do, we have to be really, really on this, because we're losing so many landlords into Essex and Hertfordshire, and it's just easier for people to rent there. And I think that well, we already know that's taking a massive toll, because when you put all the restrictions in, it's the good landlords that are leaving. And now in London, we're being left with the unscrupulous criminal landlords that don't mind if you bring in this regulation, because either way, they're not going to follow it.
No, exactly. But that's really, really great to hear about how the City Hall Conservatives are standing up for landlords. And yeah, thank you as well for talking about the positive contributions that landlords make to the private rented sector. As we know, like in the media, you hear stories all about, oh, all bad landlords. But as you just said, if we have that engagement with landlords, then hopefully we can create a positive private rented sector. And as we want good landlords to stay in the private rented sector as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. And we're standing up for the good ones, which in London help our city tick.
Exactly, exactly. Well, that's really, really great to hear about how the City Hall Conservatives are standing up for that. And we're almost running out of time now, but I just wanted to ask a quick question about the Green Belt. So obviously, Sadiq Khan, he's kind of flip-flopped on this issue a little bit, because I think he said
Yeah,
previously that he wasn't going to build on the Green Belt. But then now he seems
yeah.
to be saying that, oh, in order to solve the housing crisis, we have to build on the Green Belt. So, what are the City Hall's Conservatives' intention about building on the Green Belt?
Yeah, so it started with not one blade of grass, and now there's already proposals from TfL to build on Trent Country Park in Enfield, which is actually, so it's an actual park, which is quite some stretch, right? Because we can get into this and talk about the fact that some of the Greenbelt does have has been classified as Greenbelt, where perhaps that's clearly not the right designation. That's a different conversation about how we've designated Greenbelt. But actually, when we talk about building in London, we know that it's the brownfield sites that we need to be going for. We know that that's the easiest targets, where maybe in a lot of places there's already plans. What we really need to stop is land flipping, where basically these brownfield sites get sat on, and then basically big councils will raise their housing targets, and then they can go in for another permission and keep on raising the numbers on the same site. We actually need to make sure things get built when we've got planning permission, and actually that would be the best start in London, if we could actually get things being built where there's planning permission. But also these brownfield sites, they're going to get less local opposition, they're going to be more well accepted. Those are the places where we can really start to build. I think once we've built on the brownfield sites of London, when we've built on all those kind of old abandoned pubs, those kind of places, once we've increased density, for example, on high streets where they want to go up to two, where it's some are 2 stories, one are 1 story, where we've leveled off high streets so that everything is the same density, and increased density where it's right to do so, then I think that's when you would even begin to have a conversation about the green belt. But I don't think that conversation is now. I think that is a long way off. I think we should start building in the places where we've said for years we need to build. Looking as well, TfL stations, where station as from the mayor specifically as well, where we can put more building on top of the TfL estate. That's something we need to look at. But we're a long way off from talking about the green belt. But again, I think it's perhaps maybe an easier solution to just say there's a bit of green over there, I'll build on it, than actually have to look through the city plans and work out where you need to fit in development around existing development, which I would suggest is the best thing to do in London.
Exactly, exactly. It's building in these right places. And well, it seems to be Sadiq, as you said, yeah, it seems to be going back on it, saying, oh, not one blade of grass will be touched. But then now seems to be that he is looking at the green belt. But it's good to hear how the City Hall Conservatives are opposing that as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time now,
Yeah.
Emma, but it's been really, really great to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a really, really interesting conversation, and particularly how City Hall Conservatives are standing up for landlords. So please, please keep campaigning for landlords. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye.